Hello, I'm Diane Myers from Texas Women's University, and today we'll be talking about PBIS in the classroom, culture and relationship building. Let's start by talking about the evolution of positive behavioral interventions and supports. As the research base on PBIS grows, there's more and more emphasis being placed on the contextual fit of behavior support systems. We want to make sure that our practices and systems are culturally relevant for all students and staff, regardless of location, demographic, age, ability, disability, race, socioeconomic status, or any other variable that might impact a school's culture. We think about what culture actually is and why it's important as we continue our research in this area. How do we define culture? Some people talk about culture being like air. Air is all around you. You need it to get through each day, and you notice it very, very much when it's absent. Culture is also something that is around us every day. We need it to get through each day, and we notice it very, very much when it's not there. For instance, if we visit a different culture or if we're in a very unfamiliar place. Culture and race are not synonyms. Race is something biological that you're born with. Culture is a result of how, when, where, and by whom you are raised. Culture can affect how individuals view the world and how they live. Our students' culture impacts their experience with school, and our own culture as educators impacts our experience with school and our day-to-day interactions with students and colleagues. Culture is formed and transmitted through communication, both verbal and nonverbal. And verbal and nonverbal communication may differ from culture to culture. How is culture related to our class-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports? Well, all PBIS practices and systems are designed to be effective in any culture, as I mentioned just a minute ago. We can actually improve student outcomes by making those practices and systems more reflective of the norms and expectations for the culture of any given school, any given student population, and any given staff population. Behaviorists have been thinking about culture for quite some time, and I want to share the following perspective with you. No degree of knowledge about the characteristics of groups or cultures can substitute for the careful analysis of the actions of a given individual in their historical and situational context, because no two members of any group are socialized in exactly the same way. This means that just because you may have students who share certain cultural characteristics, they're not going to behave in exactly the same way. We need to avoid overgeneralizing or stereotyping students because they might be members of a certain culture. Think about this. If you have siblings, there's a good chance that you grow up in the same culture as your siblings. You have the same parents, you're raised with similar values, you experience similar school settings, similar neighborhood settings, community settings, but it's likely that you and your siblings have different kinds of behaviors, even though you share so many aspects of your culture. Culture shapes how we are as people and how we are as educators. All of us have had some formative experiences that impact our culture, and we're going to talk about what those might be in just a minute. We need to understand our own culture in order to ensure that our class-wide PBIS implementation is culturally relevant for all of our students. We need to think about where we're coming from so we can better understand who we are and how our culture impacts our interactions with students. So let's think about how we as educators are shaped by our culture. Your culture is shaped by where you were born and raised. Was that in an urban setting, in a suburban setting? Was it a homogeneous kind of community? Was it heterogeneous and diverse? Those factors can affect your personal culture. Your early experiences are very important to your culture. How are your early experiences with school, making friends? Those kind of early experiences can have a significant impact on who we become. We transition into adulthood, and all of us have very different experiences that shape how we become adults, whether it's working, jobs, going to school, having relationships, beginning to have significant others in our lives. Certainly as an educator, personally and professionally, we are shaped by our educational experience. Where we went to college, how our college experience was for us, if we've pursued graduate degrees, and our educational experience is directly tied to our professional experience. What have we done for jobs throughout the course of our life? What are we doing now? What do we see happening for us in the future? Do we want to stay teachers? Are we considering moving somewhere else in the profession? Our professional and personal experiences are also inextricably intertwined. Your family, your parents, your guardians, your own children if you have them, your friends, all of these personal experiences are related to our professional experience. They shape how we view our professional experience, the different priorities that we have in our lives, any personal successes, any personal losses. All of these can impact our own culture and shape our own perspective. Our most recent experiences are usually the ones that affect our current culture the most. What have we been through recently? A lot of these experiences that you've had in your life will impact the way that you interact with students. For instance, maybe your parents divorced. You can relate differently to a student whose parents have been divorced. Maybe you had some experience growing up in a single-family household. You will have a different perspective on students who grow up in a single-family household. Your personal experiences are something that you bring with you to work and to your professional relationships every day, and it's important to understand them. As part of the activity for this module, you will be completing a map like this where you look at some of your formative experiences. And remember, you bring all of these experiences with you to every interaction that you have, and so do your students. Some of the things that impact your students' culture are their gender and their gender identification, their socioeconomic status, both how they perceive it and how it's perceived by others. Sexual orientation is something that shapes our students' culture and how they view themselves and interact with others. Their racial identity is critical to their cultural identity. Their values and beliefs, which might be shaped by their parents. As students get older, often their values and beliefs are impacted by their peers. Students' abilities or disabilities can impact their culture, how they see themselves and how others see them. Their language and their accessibility to language and their ease with language can impact their culture. Their immigrant status certainly impacts their culture and will affect them on a day-to-day basis and their interactions with other people. And their family structure has a big impact on their culture. Students come to us every day with all kinds of experiences that shape who they are. None of these experiences are the same from student to student, even if some of the elements of their culture are similar. We need to remember that students bring all of this to the classroom every single day, and we need to be mindful of some of the different experiences that they may have had that shape how they view interactions with us and how it shapes their education. Here's an example of how students' culture can differ from ours. My teacher isn't qualified to teach spelling. She spells U-Y-O-U. She spells B-R-B-R-E-T-U-R-N. She spells B-F-N G-O-O-D-B-Y-E. This goes to show that differences between cultures can also be generational, as well as along some of the other variables we've identified. We also want to think about our classroom culture, and there are many different aspects that shape our classroom culture, and we want to have a culture where students feel safe and comfortable, where learning is reinforcing for them, and where we build strong relationships with our students, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. We need to have consistent consequences for our students. That creates a culture of predictability, consistency. Students know what to expect, and they feel much more comfortable when they know what to expect. The physical arrangement of the classroom denotes the kind of culture that we have. Are the desks in rows? Are the desks in pairs? Desks should be arranged according to the structure of the lesson, and that has an impact on our classroom culture. Daily routines and the definition of those daily routines impacts classroom culture. Interactions between teachers and peers have a huge impact on our classroom culture. The more positive our interactions are with our students, the more likely we are to have a classroom culture that is positive and where students feel comfortable and reinforced for being there. Acknowledging our students' appropriate behavior is critical to creating a positive classroom culture, and we'll be talking that much more in future class-wide PBIS trainings. Having culturally relevant instruction and materials that is reflective of a diverse culture and reflective of our students' culture is very important to making students feel like they are part of the instruction and feel like the instruction is relevant for them. Clear expectations will make our classroom culture improve. All students need to know is expected of them, as we just mentioned, rather than having to guess. Expectations might differ from classroom to classroom, so each classroom needs to have clear expectations for that space. Students' ability to access academic and behavioral supports and teachers' ability to provide those supports is critical to creating a functional and positive classroom culture. And lastly, the positive relationships that we build in our classroom, both teacher-student relationships and helping to facilitate positive student-to-student relationships, which we can do by having clear expectations, clear daily routines, having positive interactions with our students, acknowledging appropriate behavior. All of these will help lead to positive relationships for everyone in the classroom. Remember, your culture shapes how you are likely to act in any given situation, how you are likely to react in any given situation, how you are likely to be perceived, and also how others are likely to act in any given context, setting, or environment. Remembering that will help you as you go through your day-to-day interactions with students and you think about your culture, your students' culture, and the culture of your classroom. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about building relationships. Building relationships with students is a critical element of classroom management. Building relationships sounds like a subjective construct. That is, it doesn't sound like it's something that is well defined, but there are certain behaviors in which teachers can engage when building relationships with students. Building a relationship with students means listening to students, paying attention to what they're saying and being an active listener, being able to repeat back what they've said to you rather than just waiting for them to finish talking so you can begin talking. Showing an interest in students and their lives is another factor that helps build relationships. Seeing students as people with all of those elements of their culture that we just mentioned, seeing students who have lives outside of the classroom and asking about and showing an interest in their lives, whether it be extracurricular activities, how members of their family are doing, or just having casual social encounters where you ask students how they're doing. Those kind of interactions can make a big difference in how we build positive relationships with students. Frequent positive interactions are critical to building relationships. We want to be acknowledging students' appropriate behavior, praising them when we can, especially students who struggle to behave appropriately. Those students often have the fewest positive interactions with teachers. Changing that can change their relationships with adults and ultimately impact their overall achievement socially and academically in school. Building relationships with students is critical because students feel comfortable. They feel comfortable in the classroom, they feel comfortable talking to teachers, they're more likely to take risks academically, answering questions, even if they're not 100% sure of the answer. Building relationships with students can make school more reinforcing for students, and as we know, behavior that is reinforced occurs more frequently in the future. If students like being in school, they're more likely to continue attending, they're likely to feel comfortable and have increased academic achievement. There are some strategies that can lead to better relationships with students. For example, knowing students' names and using them frequently. All students like to have that personal connection with teacher. This can be done simply by greeting students outside of the door on their way into class. Engage in non-academic conversations with students, as we mentioned. Ask them how their day is going. Ask them about an extracurricular event that you remember. Ask them about something that they've indicated interest in, like a TV show or a concert. Practice active listening, as we discussed. Make eye contact when you're talking to students. Wait for them to finish talking before you start talking. Follow up at a later date with questions. Correct any errors in a positive and constructive manner. Model that it's okay to make mistakes. If you make an error, acknowledge that you made an error and then correct it in a positive way. Acknowledge that students can ask for help if they need it. Your classroom should be a place where students are okay with making errors. You can model that making errors is the path towards learning. Smile. Be enthusiastic about what you're teaching. If students ask you, why are we learning this? You should be able to provide an answer that shows them the relevance of your content. A few other relationship building strategies. Something like a back and forth mini journal can be very effective to have a conversation with students. You can make an entry and ask a question, students respond, and then you respond, and it gives students a way to have a conversation with you outside of the earshot of other students. Students are more likely to express themselves and tell you more in a context like this where not everyone is listening. You could do something called good things, where teachers allow students to share good experiences that occurred recently. This could be something that's done at the beginning of class to set the tone for a positive day. It could be done at the end of class to leave on a positive note. The important thing is that we acknowledge and discuss good things that are going on with our students. You can do something called 2x10, where teachers spend 2 minutes per day uninterrupted with a student each day for 10 consecutive days. So each day a teacher takes 2 minutes and spends that time talking to a student. This will contribute to building relationships. For more information, you can refer to the Student Services website, the PBIS section, on the Arlington Independent School District intranet. Reflecting on relationship building. When you're thinking about relationships, consider the following. Think about your own ability to build relationships with students. Where are you doing well with building relationships? Where could you improve? Make this part of your goal for this year. Think about the steps you can or do take to build relationships with students. How are you actively building relationships with students now? What else could you do? Are you building relationships with all of your students? Remember, it's often our students with the most challenging behaviors who need those relationships with teachers the most. Think about your ability to connect culture with building relationships. Are you considering all aspects of your culture and all aspects of your students' culture when you're building relationships? Building relationships does not just happen. It's something that takes work, planning, and you need to work at it continuously. Building relationships will improve you and your students' experiences with school. For more information, please refer to the Student Services intranet website listed here. Thank you.